Hi there, I'm Ian from Together4Children, and thank you for joining me for this virtual information event. Together4Children is your regional adoption agency for this region, and we are a partnership between 4 local authorities who have come together to provide better outcomes for children and also for adopters. Those 4 local authorities are Shropshire County Council, Staffordshire County Council, the City of Stoke-on-Trent Council, and Telford and Wrekin Council. I'm sure you'll have done lots of research about adoption and read lots of websites and lots of information about the different types of adoption, but we want to give you just an overview of the main 2. Traditional adoption, as we call it these days, is the one you're probably more aware of, and it's a legal process of transferring all rights and responsibilities from a birth parent across to yourselves as an adoptive parent. It's the only law in the UK that can't be rescinded once it's granted, so you will become the legal parents to those children for their lifetime. Early permanency is slightly different. It's a newer initiative, but it's becoming more prominent. Early permanency is about placing children much earlier in their lives with you to begin to build those bonds and attachments that you would expect. So with traditional adoption, if you sort of imagine the journey that a child may have to come to adoption, they can't live with their own birth families for a particular reason. So they may be placed with foster carers, a form of temporary care, until they're matched and come to live with yourselves as adopters. Now, during that period of temporary care, the children are building bonds, as you would expect and want, with their foster carers, before having to build them again with yourselves. In terms of early permanence, which includes things called foster to adopt, we can place children with yourselves much earlier, and you act, in essence, as a foster carer for those children, in the hope and plan that you will then go on to adopt those children. So in terms of the benefits for the children, are quite clear to see. They're building attachments with yourselves much earlier, without then having to be placed between foster carer and adopter. The benefits for yourself is that a child may be placed with you much earlier in their life, sometimes from the maternity ward, very young babies. With traditional adoption, there's very little risk, if any, attached. But with early permanence and foster to adopt, there may be additional risks attached. For instance, we may not have a plan for that child of adoption. It is our hope and expectation that that plan will follow. But it is not always the case where it's guaranteed. And it could be the child would return back to their birth family or a birth relative as a positive outcome for that child. If we talk about the types of children we're looking for adopters for, they cover all age ranges from about 0, birth, up to 5, 6, possibly 7. But we know that by the time the child gets to sort of 4 or 5 school age, the chance of them being adopted diminishes greatly. And this is a shout out really to encourage you to think about whether you could adopt an older child who's at school age. We understand why lots of people come forward to adopt very young children. But in terms of health issues and disabilities and such like, adopting an older child who may be 4 or 5, these issues may be more known and more pronounced, and remove some of those risk elements of adopting a very young child that we know little about in terms of their health backgrounds. We're looking for adopters from all ethnicities to represent the region. As I mentioned, many of our children may have health issues and disabilities, and we will share as much information as we know with you as we go through that matching process. We know that most of the children in the UK with a plan of adoption are part of a sibling group, about 51% nationally. So we're encouraging people to come forward and consider that they adopt a sibling group of 2, 3, or possibly larger. Obviously, the children who have a plan of adoption can't live with their birth family for a particular reason. Only a very small number each year are through voluntary relinquishments, where children are voluntarily relinquished by their birth parent. Most have been removed legally from their birth parents, as the birth parents can't care for them in the appropriate way, and therefore the children may be exposed, and probably have been exposed, to some of those key elements that are listed there in terms of physical, sexual or emotional abuse, and also neglect. We talked on the previous slide about why children may come into the care system. It's as usual that the parents have tried to love and support their children in the best way that they can, but often they're not able to provide appropriate care, and it's made the decision of the courts to legally remove those children from their birth parents and free them for adoption. Now, children may have been exposed in their household to things like alcohol and substance misuse, chaotic parenting, and poverty and depression. Parents may have abused their children in lots of forms, as we discussed previously. Sometimes the parents may have learning difficulties and not are able to care for children in the most appropriate way. And as we also mentioned, occasionally there are voluntary relinquished children. Some children will have difficulties, perhaps older children, as they've lived with their birth parents and then lived with foster carers prior to you adopting them and becoming their adoptive parents. Because of this, we need you to be available to care for the child for a very significant period after they come to live with you, encouraging you to take a significant period of time away from work. If you have any issues about this, speak to a social worker when they come to visit you. As children develop, it may be that they have issues around their own sense of identity. Research has told us that this tends to happen around the age of 8, and it's important that you have an open approach to adoption and talk to your child in an appropriate way about adoption. And also, we say to adopters, always be ready for those random questions from time to time. Some children may present behaviours that they have seen in their birth household, and for some children, they may struggle within education. But what we want to assure you is that there is support there, and we will talk about that later in the presentation. In terms of who can adopt, the criteria is quite clear and quite easy really to understand. You must be legally aged over 21, and you can be single or in a relationship. But you would need to live together if you are in a relationship for a minimum of 2 years to be able to show that stability of your partnership. You can rent or own your own home with a mortgage, for instance. But what we do ask is that you have a spare bedroom for the child you're looking to adopt, and they don't share with you or any birth children. If you are potentially looking to adopt a sibling group, it may be appropriate for them to share together, dependent on their age and gender and background. Some adopters have children and some do not, but where people have birth children, we tend to place the adoptive child below the age of your youngest birth child, so there's no displacement within the family. And we tend to use a period of about 2-year age gap, just so children are not hitting all the same milestones together. Though we're not looking for people to be multimillionaires, we are asking you to have a stable financial situation and able to meet the costs of caring for an extra child within your household. And we ask you to consider those implications as well as taking time away from work to support through the adoption process. To give some additional guidance about who can adopt. In terms of smoking, we get asked a lot by people if they smoke, can they adopt? And the answer is yes, but we follow the core and BAF guidance that suggests that if you are looking to adopt and you are a smoker within the household, that you adopt a child over the age of 5. In terms of fertility journeys, we know lots of our adopters come to adoption after completing a fertility journey, and we ask that you leave a period of about 6 months between completing any fertility journey and starting the adoption journey, just to be sure that adoption is the option that you wish to progress. In terms of bereavements and loss, if you've had any significant bereavements, perhaps a loss of a child or a very close relative, we may ask you to defer your application for about 12 months to come to terms with these significant changes in your life. In terms of other significant changes, things like moving house or job changes or such like, again, we may ask you to defer slightly until you'll feel settled and stable to progress the adoption journey. In terms of health, we will undertake some medical references from contacting your GP to get some information around that. If you have any medical issues, please do share them with us, but it shouldn't stop you at this stage inquiring and looking to progress with the adoption journey. Adoption has its ups and downs, and one thing we'll want to explore with you is a solid support network who will be able to support you on a day-to-day basis, both in the practical journey and the emotional support that you may need. Pets. We get asked about pets quite a lot. Having a pet doesn't stop you adopting. In fact, sometimes pets can be really supportive of children. If the pet falls into a particular category or a large number of pets, that might be something that we would need to talk to you about or do a veterinary report. We also ask you to consider the age of the child that you may be looking to adopt in relation to the age of any birth children you have in the household. I mentioned a little while ago in the presentation that we tend to place children younger than your own birth children and leave a gap of about 2 years. Following this virtual information event, if you wish to proceed, there will be information on the email to explain how to do that. but in terms of the process itself, it takes about 6 months to complete the assessment journey. The initial visit will follow, and that will be the first interaction perhaps that you have with an adoption social worker, when they will come out, visit you, tell you a little bit more about adoption, answer any questions that you may have, and give you more guidance. If at the end of that meeting you wish to proceed and the social worker agrees with you, you can enter stage 1, which is a process which takes about 2 months. It's called adopter-led, and it's a period of you providing us with lots of information so we can do background checks and references. And also we ask you to undertake a period or short period of training to give you the skills that you need to become an adoptive parent. Stage 2 itself takes about 4 months, and it's when a social worker will visit you several times, maybe 6, 7, 8 times, to build a portfolio, which is called the PAR, Permanency Adoption Report, which talks about you, your family, everything that makes you, your history, a really large piece of work. It will be then presented to panel, which will hopefully read the PAR, read all about you and the skills that you have to be an adopter, and then recommend you to become an adopter. That whole process, as I mentioned, usually takes about 6 months. So once you have been approved as an adopter, we can begin the matching and linking process. So as I say, once you've been approved, we will work closely with you to help you find the right child or children who could be part of your family group. For many, this will happen really quickly, though we cannot make any guarantees. In terms of the linking, what we may do is provide you with lots of information about children and written profiles and videos. Matching is a term that we use where we're beginning to identify a suitable child to be part of your family. Once we've done that, you may go to matching panel. A matching panel is when your social worker will take you, along with the identified child's information, to the panel, be formally matched with that child. Once that has happened, we can begin introductions. Now, introductions take place, as I say, after the matching panel, and is a gradual transition for the child from living potentially with their foster parents to yourselves as their new adoptive parents. During a period, this often takes about 2 weeks or so, and contact will increase day on day, and you will care for the child in an increasingly gradual way. Once that has taken place, the child will be completely placed with yourselves. In terms of adoption support is there for the life of your child. We know from experience that not everybody needs to access support, but depending on the background of the child that you may adopt, it's important for you to understand that we are there to give you the support that you need. In terms of post-box contact, a lot of adopters, when they come along to adoption, don't really think about the impact what they'll have on a child in terms of thinking about their adoption story. We encourage and recommend that all our adopters have what we call an open adoption, so the child knows about their history. And we will expect you to write 1 letter each year, which will come to ourselves as an agency to be screened and then passed on to the child's birth family, and vice versa. You are then able to share this with the child in an appropriate way when you need to. It could be, dependent on the circumstances, there is a face-to-face initial meeting between birth parents and yourselves before the adoption takes place. I hope that during this virtual presentation I've answered most of the questions that you have about adoption, and feel free and able to progress to the next stage. If you do have any questions, we would love to hear from you and have those conversations. And with the email that sent this video across, there will be information about how you can have a chat to somebody, get those questions answered, and find out a little bit more about progressing to the next stage. But from myself, I would just like to thank you for spending the 15 minutes or so listening to our presentation, and I wish you good luck on your adoption journey.